let's say you're at a bar, coffee shop, whatever, and somebody were to ask you who you are, what would you say the answer to that is?
Yeah. Well, I mean, truly, whether in a coffee shop, bar, or even on a big platform speaking, I almost always begin with the same answer. I'm a husband
Hmm.
first. I'm a dad of four. I'm a son to two, mom and dad, who are still both alive. They're both struggling a little bit with some health issues. I'm in my mid 40s and I'm the middle child of six. So that puts my
Wow.
parents at about the age of 80. So like they're getting a little bit older up in age, but I'm still their son, still grateful for that. Been married for 20 years, been a father for 18 and 16 and 14 and 12, and an extraordinarily grateful human being at this point in my life.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what you've not heard is anything I do professionally, because I think it just doesn't define me at all. So I'm grateful for work that we believe matters and that keeps the roof on over our heads and keeps the lights on in our ceiling. But more than that, we're trying to love the one in front of us.
Love the one in front of you. It's beautiful, man. I like the priorities there. Let's get into what you do a little bit because I love the appreciation. It radiates off of you. You got a sweet energy to you. I love it. What about the what you do for a living? Let's get into that a little bit. And then how does that kind of contributes to this energy and this vibrance that you experience life and the gratitude that contributes to that?
All right, man. Well, I'm gonna back up then a little bit because I think the journey to ultimately figuring out what to do is part of the story. So when I finished college, well, even while I was still in college, I was an IT and finance major, figuring I would work at one of the big commercial banks here in St. Louis, Missouri. We had AG Edwards and eventually Wells Fargo and Stifel Nicholas and pretty big international banks and investment firms. And I assumed that's where I would work. You know, what a great gig. And I was working Christmas Eve as a junior in college, and it was snowing outside, and I'm pounding away on some keyboard for somebody else, and I recognized, man, like that's not what I want to do in my life. I knew my mom and dad were together, my five siblings were together. It was snowing on Christmas Eve. They're enjoying family, they're enjoying the holidays, and I'm working in a profession that I was not finding meaning in. So
Mm.
that started me on this journey, even while still in college, like, man, figure out your own way. And so while as a senior in college, I bought an old house. It was a six-family home in an older part of St. Louis, Missouri, with the intent of fixing it up. I'd never painted my own bedroom, let alone hung drywall or sheeted a roof or anything else. But you figure things out as you go along. One of my buddies and I did this work. We were just barely successful enough to do it again, and then again, and then again for about a decade. And it was a successful business financially, but it did not fill me with meaning. So at about the age of 29, I became a hospital chaplain, searching for meaning, not chaplaincy, just to make sure folks recognize on the podcast. It's not so much about evangelization. It's about loving the one in front of you, regardless of where they are. Really, like their faith background, how
Mm.
they vote, how they appear,
Mm. I
like all
love
that
that.
stuff that frequently divides.
Mm.
Many chaplains come up with a very strong faith background. I do, but our job is to put that away and just meet people where they are. So that was a really cool job for about 3 years while still doing construction. And then during this period of time, I was invited by a little girl to speak at her school. And when she asked me, I had no idea, like, what about what and why she wanted me to speak. And this gets to the core of your question is she said, Mr. O'Leary, I read about what you went through as a kid, and I hoped you would share that story. So what she was wanting me to go through was the story of being burned at age 9
Mm.
on 100% of my body, spending 5.5 months in hospital, losing my fingers to amputation, going through dozens of surgeries, years of therapy, and then the story that I'd buried for 20 years afterwards. So I'd never told anyone, Kyle, like how I got burned. Like I was trying not to be defined by it. But on that day, man, I remember saying yes to this little girl, hanging up the phone, regretting it immediately. But I've learned in life, like, do the best you can. Just serve the one in front of you as effectively as you can. So I spoke to her little school, and on the way out, one of the dads pulled me aside and said, "Man, that was awesome. Would you speak at my Rotary Club?
Mm.
And then would you speak at my Kiwanis Club and my Chamber of Commerce? And I run a prison in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Would you speak there?" And Kyle, I just kept saying yes. Um, And it led, and we can back into this later on, but it led to an introverted guy who had never told anyone about being burned,
Mhm.
speaking 2,600 times, 49 states, dozens of countries, millions and millions of people as a professional speaker. And that as that evolved, we became more intentional on social media, which led to an opportunity to create a couple books. They became bestsellers, one called On Fire, one called In Awe. Then we launched our own podcast. We launched our own coaching program. And then most recently, there was a movie filmed with William H. Macy and John Corbett, among others, portraying the story. And it's going to be coming out in about a year. So we do a lot of different things now, but it all goes back to how do you love the one in front of you enough so they recognize the value of their life?
Mm. So they recognize the value in their life. There's something to that, man. It's beautiful. Do you want to get into the burn story a little bit? And then we can sort of, would you mind sharing that?
Yeah, I don't mind. It's what we do now. So 22 years ago, I would have minded a lot because I wouldn't have had a clue what to say next. But now it's what we do all day long. And it's pretty cool when you can embrace the scars that you used to cover up. And I'm not just talking to the burn victims out there, because, dude, everybody's gone through something. And most of us are pretending like it doesn't define the way we show up, or we maybe show it off almost too much. Like we're almost defined by it.
Hmm.
But I'm not defined by the burns. I just I'm free because of them. It's a weird deal. But when I was a kid, I saw boys in my neighborhood playing with fire and gasoline. They were 11-year-olds. I was 9, and I assumed, man, if they can do it, come on, dude, so can I. So on a Saturday morning in January of 1987, I went into my parents' garage, bent over a 5-gallon can of gasoline, and tried to pour a little bit of gas on top of this piece of cardboard. And before the liquid even came out, the fumes came out of this can, massive explosion, split the can in two, picked up the 9-year-old, launched me 20 feet against the far side of the garage, and just to change my life. It caught me on fire, caught the garage on fire, caught the house on fire. Very long story, and you can ask anything you want about it. But ultimately, I found myself in the emergency room that morning with burns on my entire body. I'm dying. I'm scared. I hear my dad's voice down the hall. He's yelling at some nurse, "Where is my boy, John?" And I remember thinking, dude, the old man has come to finish me off. He's going to be so mad when he hears what
Mm.
I did to his house. And this father of mine comes back into this room, pulls back the curtain, marches toward me. He's an old veteran, marches toward me, points down and says, "John, look at me when I'm talking to you. I have never been so proud of anyone in my entire life. And my little buddy, today, this morning, I'm just proud to be your dad." And then he says, "I love you. And there's nothing you can do about it." And for this little boy, my first thought was, no one told my dad what happened. Like he clearly doesn't know I burned down the house, man. But as it started to make sense that he did know, what it ultimately fueled for us was not like ease of journey, but instead like a firmness of foundation from which we could leap off, like a safety net almost, like the recognition that it would not be easy, but it would be possible together. So there's so many people kind of like credit for like how I ended up in this chair today and being on your podcast and having some of the things we have in this world. But I'm not sure any of them would have happened had it not been for the way my father stepped into that room on day one and treated his son.
Beautiful story, man. It's touching. And you're not only talking about the physiological scars, because a lot of us can't relate to that, but you're talking about the psychological scars as well, that you think that either we're defined by, that we define our life around what happened to us, or the opposite of the spectrum, which is completely denying it
Right.
and separating it, splitting from it. And you were saying that, I mean, I want to go into a little bit when you were 29, what that transition looked like. When the little girl came up to you and asked you to speak, what did that, how did that work from not ever wanting to share to being very um, introverted as the way that you put it, and then being able to tell the story, to own it, to not let it define you, but to allow it to help others and to be open about something very clearly terrible that happened. I mean, but then it's not, because it also is very beautiful because of what you've made out
Totally.
of it, right? And so walk me through what that transition looked like when the little girl asked you to speak. What happened with your belief system, with your identity, to be able to share?
Dude, it's a 180-degree pivot. So it's a complete shift in life in the exact opposite direction and in a very
Mm,
positive manner.
mm,
There's beauty, I think, in not being defined by brokenness. Like there's
mm,
beauty in like an amputee running a marathon. Like when you see a guy who lost his leg in an explosion, and then you see that very same person running a marathon, there's something incredibly heroic about that. And it's important to also recognize that sometimes you can't just hide from what happened. You've got to like wrestle with it. Those are
mm,
two different
mm,
things. And so I had a very active, good life after being burned, but there was some collateral damage in never embracing what happened. There's some collateral damage in pretending like I'd not been burned, like I wasn't sometimes in physical pain, like I did not sometimes emotionally struggle. And to deal with that, what I was doing, one of three things. One is ignored it entirely. One was self-medicating, either through success or alcohol or humor or whatever. And the third was just to put a mask over it, the mask of long sleeves or the mask of praise from others. But like none of this is ultimately
mm,
healthy or healing. So I had a good life for 20 years after I got burned, but not a great one. And what that Girl Scout speech allowed me to begin doing, not immediately, it's not a quick fix. It allowed me to begin embracing with others what I was unable to embrace at home by myself. And so the slow
mm,
turn over the next 20 years of speaking now was to first go and almost like go for their praise, like their applause. The Samoa cookies from them, the payment from other clubs, the invitation to speak again, a standing ovation for how great I was. Like all this stuff, still about external success. Now, what drives me has nothing to do with any of that stuff. It is the one-to-one individual contact afterwards with individuals coming up and saying to me, John, it's nothing like your story, but, and then they drop their line in and they share their story and they share their brokenness and they share their hope and they share what they've been through or what they're currently going through. So for me, I use the platform. We speak in big events now to 30,000 at a time sometimes. But the reason why we do the work as motivational speakers, as leadership teachers, is to eventually have that one-to-one contact afterwards. And I'll put a bow on it with this little story. I was in Phoenix last week at like an IT conference. So, these are pretty straight-laced individuals in this room. And yet they came up afterwards, story after story after story, one by one, just incredible stories. And yet my favorite was the story of a guy who came up and said, John, I am 44 years of age. I'm like, well, dude, congratulations on it. Well done. He goes, yeah, I know. I made it to 44 years of age without once hearing from my dad the words, I love you. And he said, I made it to 44 years of age without once sharing with my dad the words, I love you. And then he said, I heard your story today. So after you were done talking, I texted my dad and I told him that I loved him. And then he went on and shared a little bit more than that. And while he waited in line to say hello to me, his phone buzzed back,
mm.
and his father wrote him back. And he said, "Son, it's been entirely too long, and these words are hard for me to say, and I don't know why they are, but I love you, and I'm proud of you, and here's why."
Hmm.
So it's like, dude, why do you do the work you do? Is it for the revenue? Is it to grow top line? Is it to grow bottom line profitability? Is it to have more pictures on the wall, speeches you've given, more little dots on where you've spoken? Phoenix now, and up now in Scottsdale. Now we've been in Costa Rica. Aren't we awesome? I think at one point that might have been what kind of drove us. And now it's not. And now it is all about the individual stories of impact. And that makes me hungry. So we've done
Hmm.
some cool things in the past, but we believe our best work is ahead.
How did that shift work from that external validation that you were seeking to the internal why that your purpose? is, that you're driven by this greater cause that you're contributing to. What did that shift look like from I want the applause, the money, everything that could come from it to wait a minute, that's not as fulfilling as I thought it would be. Let's move on to something else. What did that look like for you?
So I'm in my faith background, I'm a Christian, and there's a guy in our faith system named Saint Paul. And before he was Paul, he was Saul. And Saul was kind of a tough guy. And he had this moment where his whole life changed in a blink of an eye. They call it the Damascus experience. Like one moment, his whole life radically changed. And I think that is such a cool story. And some of the guests you might have brought on your podcast or books you may read have stories like that. Boom. And then it turns.
Yeah.
That's not my story, man. I wish there was a singular moment when I could say, and this is how it changed, and this listener is how it might change for you. For me, it's more like erosion. So often in life, it's just
Hmm.
like slow grade. But like erosion, it usually wears true. So
Hmm.
if I'm looking for a moment, it's hard to give you one, but a moment would be I was speaking in Costa Rica to like a group of business owners, presidents. So these are all presidents. They run nice sized businesses in Costa Rica. And that was awesome. But the following day, one of my partners and I, we went into a hospital in Costa Rica. And Costa Rica sounds lovely, and it is, but it's also very impoverished. So we went into this hospital, and it's open windowed, like meaning there aren't windows. Like imagine being a burn patient without even windows for protection. They'd recently run out of morphine. So these little patients are going through agony, exposed to the elements. And so we're torn. We're visiting with these kids and their families. And then afterwards, we had this like meeting room where patients who had recovered came together to meet with someone else who had recovered, John O'Leary, their new friend from America, and to deliver this speech in English, to have it translated by my friend in Spanish, and to have these sweet little faces gathered around the room. It's a turning moment to know that some of them were on pickup trucks for up to 5 hours that day just to get in to meet this guy. And then they were going to go back onto the back of a pickup truck and drive back to their little towns, their little villages, just for a moment of inspiration, a moment of hope. You begin when you have experiences like this, whether they take place in Costa Rica at a burn center or in prisons or in executive tables, or like I mentioned to you earlier in Phoenix, where you're there for the IT event, this big conference. But it's one guy who said the words, I love you to his dad, to recognize ultimately why you're doing the work you do. And so, one way to make sure our team, because I run a team here called Live Inspired, our team stays focused on that is we begin every Monday meeting with, we call it a mission moment. And what they know is coming their way before the meeting begins is I want you to share one example from the previous 7 days of your life where you saw the mission of Live Inspired. That's your work lived out and impacted in your life. So that's when they come with emails they've received or people who've come by the office or impact that we've been part of. So not collective stories, because that's easy, but individual stories of impact. And it is to ground me and us in the value of the work done right, one life at a time. Our mission, and I'll be quiet. Our mission statement is we change the world. We positively change the world one life at a time, starting with our own. So many people want to vote the difference in, or weight the difference in, or hope the difference in, or whatever it is. We want to fight it in, but we recognize that fight starts at home, staring back at you in the mirror.
Hmm. There's something to the one individual as opposed to the masses. Like for example, the thirsty women in Africa, or there's the promotional videos that encourage you to donate so that they can get water. And the promotional videos don't show the whole community starving or needing water. It shows one individual who walks 15 miles to the well each day so that she can bring water to her little girl. It's the one person who can inspire people to make a massive change in the way that they're looking at the situation. And there's something to that. I want to get into a little bit what you do at Live Inspired. If somebody were to ask you, somebody who didn't know what you guys do, how would you explain it? We can kind of get into exactly how you do it.
I mean, man, we give pragmatic hope.
Hmm.
We shift people's perspectives. We empower people to take back the agency in their lives. We remind individuals that in spite of what the media, which gets paid to do this, does a phenomenal job of doing, which is to divide and to sow seeds of negativity and doubt. We inspire people to recognize that life is hard and the foundation is firm and the best is yet to come. Those two things can coexist. Life can be unabashedly difficult and it can be unbelievably beautiful, filled with opportunity to make it better in your life and with and for the lives of others. So that's super broadly the work that we do. We do that work then through our keynote speaking. We do that work through our consulting, through our coaching programs. We do that work through our social media channel. We do that work through our Live Inspired podcast. We do that work on the podcasts of others like yours. We do that work in coffee shops and in churches and in diners and in synagogues. We do that work where we are when we're there. We do that work in a forthcoming movie, which we believe is going to change millions more lives. But more than all that, we do that work one life at a time. That is the only way I know to scale change.
Hmm.
Well, it's not, it's ugly, man. It's messy. It is slow. And it is the way to get it done right.
Interesting. Yeah, there's two sides to that coin. You're damn right. What's interesting is the way that you talked about changing perspective for somebody. A lot of the perspectives that I think a typical entrepreneur might have is that money is all important. We work nonstop to achieve what we are believing that we are deserving of achieving once we put in this amount of effort. And deserving is not the right word. It's more so effort, accomplishment, and income as a result of it. And
Right.
what I've been finding out recently is that the income itself isn't nearly as fulfilling as I thought it would be as I was working through the pain, through the bottom down lows and it's hard to talk about the bottom down lows to you because it's like, yeah, I've been here and then you've been here, so it's like, but we got to keep it relative because not everybody's and not a lot of people have been able to experience the pain that you've gone through, yet you've been able to reframe it as something beautiful and positive. And so how do you go about shifting that meaning from chasing income, which is not fulfilling once you have it, you realize that, to finding a bigger reason, a bigger
Right.
why to aim for? How do you do that? Hey, I hope you're enjoying the podcast, and I want to let you know that I've got a free book that you can get if you want to tap into more of these resources. And you can get that for free at kylesbook.com. Back to the podcast.
And both matter. I mean, I'm always cautious to remind people, both internally, my team members, and externally, our colleagues, including you, that we are not a not-for-profit. We are unabashedly
I like it.
capitalistic.
That's what I'm
We
talking about.
have a very clear goal for 2024. We had a very clear one for 23 and 22. We've been running this thing for 19 and a half years. We've never had a year where we lost money.
Hmm.
We've never had a year where we weren't growing. Like imagine that. Uh, but we grow because we know the more we grow, the more lives we can change. So remaining mission centered is ultimately, I think, what drives us to pursue growth, which then ultimately leads to revenue. The goal is not the revenue. That is the byproduct of mission work done right in our world. And I believe in the world of any entrepreneur. You and I talked offline right before we recorded, and you talked about that sales call you just had. When you serve that one client right and well, and you change their business and their lives for the right reasons, not only do they pay you, they tell their friends about you. And then all of a sudden, yeah, more revenue comes in. But if you're living out the mission of the reason why you do the work in the first place, you get more opportunities to do that work, more opportunities to live loudly that mission, which gives you greater flexibility, not only banging that drum of making more money. Good for you. Almost any fool can do that, candidly, but doing more meaningful projects with the money you're not generating. So
Hmm.
what we have found is we're generating more than we've ever generated, but we're able to do more with that than we've ever been able to do, which is so exciting.
What are some of the ways that you're taking the income, the profit that you're making, and being able to take this and turn it into that in terms of the impact? What are you doing with it?
So it's both individual and collective. in the last 2 days, this is just from a number standpoint, but we've written two different five-figure checks to charities that we believe in. This is in the
Mm,
last 2 days, man, which I would have been completely unable to do 20 years ago when this started. Probably could not have done that in a year. And
mm,
we're able to do it with far greater frequency now. Like that's unbelievable to me. But it's on the heels of just doing the right work for the right reason, day after day after day, year after year, decade after decade. The income is showing up, and now the impact in the community can happen. How cool to sponsor that kind of impact, to scale it in the lives of other not-for-profits you believe in. So that's super cool. I'm able, though, now to even hire people internally who can live out the mission of Live Inspired in our community. So it used to be
mm,
John would be invited in to speak, and it's like, oh, now what do we do? Because once he's leaving Pittsburgh, he ain't coming back for about a year. So we recognized, well, we should probably support them somehow. So we started writing newsletters. We started creating interactive social media. We built an online platform for those individuals to come back.
mm,
We put up a flag to say, if you ever need anything, reach out to us. We're all in, which allows us to get phone calls and text messages all the time with people making requests. We get messages almost every single day with people saying there's a family in West Virginia or a little boy in Washington who was burned. Can you do something? And our answer has always been yes. But now I have someone on our staff whose entire job is to reflect John O'Leary. So I can't be everywhere all the time, but this individual can be there for me. She can let me know exactly what's going on. She can let me know what they need, when they need a video or a signed book or a personal visit. She can help facilitate all of that with and for us. And so her work is to change the world one life at a time, one life at a time. And so I think that's one of the coolest things we're doing right now is how we are functionally living out this message. And then I'll say one more thing and be quiet again. There was a guy who showed up in our life when I was 9. His name was Jack Buck. He was the radio announcer for the St. Louis Cardinals. He's got a son named Joe Buck, who is a Hall of Fame announcer himself today. Jack Buck changed my life because he came into my life the day after I got burned, and I knew the sound of his voice because I
mm,
grew up listening to that voice. And at age 9, when I was first burned, I could do nothing. I could not move in a hospital bed. I could not could not talk because I was on a trach. I could not see. So I'm in total darkness, completely cut off, but I could listen.
mm,
So when the announcer for your local baseball team, the St. Louis Cardinals, comes into your room when you are a 9 and he's your hero, it changes you from the inside out. Hope matters. Like I think we underrate to the degree how our expectations for tomorrow influence how we show up today. There's something called the placebo effect. They don't understand why it happens. And in fact, they're trying to explain it away. But why not leverage it instead? Like what you think will happen tomorrow starts happening today. That's incredible. Jack Buck came into my life one time, encouraged me, and said, John, when you get out of here, we are going to celebrate what John O'Leary did at the ballpark. Keep fighting. He leaves. He's told by the doctors and nurses that I'm going to die. And when that news shows up in your world or your listeners' world or the world, what do we do next when the media says, well, that's always how it's been in the Middle East, or that's always how it's been between the Democrats and the Republicans, or between people who are white and people who are black, or Muslims and Christians. It's just, it is what it is. What Jack did, a man from the greatest generation, a man who had a purple heart, he cried, he prayed, he reflected, and he journaled on the question, what more can I do? It was his daily journal prompt, entrepreneurs. What more can I do to
mm,
make tomorrow better than today?
mm,
If you're looking for one takeaway from this long ramble, you may want to write down those 5 words. What more can I do? The following day, there is a little 9-year-old boy dying in a hospital bed. His name is John O'Leary. And then Jack Buck comes into this room, sits down next to me, and says, kid, wake up. I'm back. You are going to live. Keep fighting.
mm,
John O'Leary Day at the ballpark will make it all worthwhile. See you soon. Kyle, he walks out, and then the following day he comes back, and then the following day, and then the following day. Eventually, he leaves for spring
wow.
training. When he leaves for spring training, he sends football players in his stead
Hmm,
and hockey players in his stead and other celebrities locally in his stead. Jack Buck taught us the power of 4 things. What happens in life when you hear an opportunity of making a difference and you say yes.
Mm.
When you have the audacity after saying that yes of showing up, when you are bold enough to come back, and then when you are loving and generous enough to bring friends. So what our whole business today is about is when the need arises, say yes, show up, come back, bring friends. Like,
Mm.
dude, that's what we want to do at scale.
And you are
And
doing it
so,
at scale, man. That's exactly what you're doing at scale, which is it's so freaking cool because and like this is my next question because a lot of people would go through something like that, and a lot of people have and said, well, God, they have a hard relationship with God and reality afterwards because what kind of a God could put me through that? Right. And then
right,
they don't reframe it and pivot it so that it's a potentially positive experience in the future. How did you sort of, because at 29 you were um, doing what you were doing, how did you really start to build that relationship with God after what had happened to a 9-year-old
right.
boy who didn't know any better? It could have happened to any of us. How did you rebuild that relationship to the point where you're at now with him and your life?
Totally. So there's a question all of us ask, but the manner in which we ask it is radically different. And that question is, why me?
Yeah.
And with a collective negative tone in social media and in mainstream media, certainly, the way the vast majority of us ask that question now is why me? In fact, in America, there's a negative perspective about what tomorrow has in store. Really, for the first time in the history of our country, we
Mm.
believe the best days are behind us. This is radical thinking for our nation. Never before have we thought that. The best days are behind us. Are you kidding me? Move west, baby. Let's go, man. Let's go do something. In fact, we used to live to such a degree that we weren't building something for ourselves. We were building it for those who would come behind us. They were called
Um,
children and
mm.
neighbors and family. And dad, I'm going to make you proud, man. That's what we used to build for. Now we wait for it to be given to us and we wonder why we have a negative perspective of what tomorrow has in store. So our favorite question to ask is why me? Why the explosion? Why the abusive parent? Why the addiction? Why the divorce? Why the bankruptcy? Why Trump? Why Biden? Why more fighting in the middle? Why me? Why me? That's one question that I think I used to ask after first getting burned and living with scars for 20 years. That began to turn after that speech to the Girl Scouts, and then a few more speeches, and then a few more, and then a few more, and then a few more, and then a few hundred more into a completely different question. So this is also worth writing down. You've already written down, listeners, one question. What more can I do? Now I want you to write down another question that is equally powerful. And that question, you ready for it? Why me? Why the gift of sight and the ability to hear and a heart that beats? Have you ever thought about how miraculous it is that your heart beats without you doing a stupid darn thing about it?
Yeah.
We get bored by life and we're mad at Starbucks for putting too much cream in our coffee in the morning. But shockingly enough, we have rods and cones in our eyes that allow us to see the cup. And whether you're looking through a microscope or a magnifying glass or whatever you're looking through in life, like life is dancing in front of us and we're bored by it. So I beg you and our listeners to say, man, why me, dude? Like it is a shocking gift that we're in the game.
Huh.
So the exact
Right.
same question asked through a different lens
Wow.
changes us from looking down at misery, at how unfair life is, or the
Mm.
amputations of our hands, or the struggles in life, or the bankruptcy, the divorce, or the fighting going on internally and externally, into recognizing how firm the foundation is and how we have agency to do something to make it better in our life and for the lives that are going to come behind us. So that idea of how do you make amends with God, uh, I think God is big enough in my faith view to be wrestled with. So I wrestled with God for decades. And eventually, in surrendering, he won, but so did I.
In surrendering. Interesting. Because Jacob, when wrestling with God, didn't, and I'm amateur with the Bible, he didn't surrender, did he? He got injured, but didn't surrender. What do you mean surrender? Because there's something powerful to that.
Well, I think with Jacob, the sun was starting to come up, and what his ankle was disjointed afterwards. Mine was not. I was disfigured afterwards. But I think many of us view quitting as what happens at the end of that fight.
Hmm.
And I don't believe in quitting, but I do believe in occasionally surrendering, which is to raise up the white flag of recognizing the things you cannot change, embracing the things you can, and then being bold enough to take the next right step forward. So when I surrendered, it wasn't a matter of giving up. It was a matter of like giving in and finally recognizing the dignity and the value of the life that had stared back at me my entire life. When you are trying to cover up or put makeup on the various things that you're afraid define you, and when you are finally liberated to stop applying the makeup or to roll up the sleeves or to say to the world, I like a movie called The World's The Greatest Showman.
Mm.
And there's a song sung about halfway through that movie by a bearded woman. This is me. There's something freaking awesome about walking on the stage and saying, dudes, this is me. This is me. So my surrender to God wasn't about hiding. It was about finally recognizing the beauty that had already been there.
The beauty that had already been there. Hmm. The surrendering is difficult. I mean, it can be perceived as difficult because we're so wired to want to try to control things as opposed to letting go, doing what you can, but not attaching to the result and letting go and seeing what happens. Because I find that when I try to attach to something, I need it to happen, it often doesn't happen because I put
Totally.
the energy that I push into it actually pushes away what I wanted to happen. And so there's a real balance that I've got to strike. I think a lot of people, if not everybody, has to strike between faith that what will happen is meant to happen is the balance between goal setting and letting it happen. No
Yes.
forcing, right? How do you find that balance though, man? It's like it seems contradictory on the surface, goal setting and letting it happen at the same time. So
Mm,
where's the mix in that? How would you say that the balance is to be struck in that situation?
awesome. So I'll give you two quick, hopeful answers that might help a little bit take the next step forward. My father was a really hardworking guy. He was an attorney, a partner, business owner, a veteran, type A. And then every day he would come in from work at 6 o'clock, boom, on the dot. We'd have a family dinner together. And every day, almost as if externally trying to show what was taking place internally, he would undo his tie because he wore a tie to work every day, a suit. He would undo his tie kind of like casually and undo and like untuck his shirt.
Hmm.
And it was this way in my mind. We never talked about it, and I've never shared that story before. But it was almost like, dude, all day long, I have been pounding the hammer, trying to do the work. Time to exhale, time to enjoy the fruits of my labor, and I'll get back to it tomorrow morning. So there's something to be said about when you are working, work like a dog, but when you are playing, play like a puppy.
Hmm.
And my dad struck
Hmm.
that balance brilliantly as a
Hmm.
guy, as a man, as a leader, as an example. So I saw that in my dad growing up. When he was working, dude, he strived. And when he got home, he was reminded of why he strived in the first place. It was not about the stuff. They got to set goals too. Got to keep everybody paid. Got to keep the lights on. But what's the point of any of it if it steals your joy from when you are with the people you ought to be most with anyway in life?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's one answer to it. Alternatively, but I think importantly, in my own relational life, I never dated through middle school, high school, and college. Then I met this girl named Beth, and you see her picture behind me. We ended up getting married after pursuing her for 2 years. Apply the business tenets to this now, kind of
Yeah.
strategic and setting goals. And I planned my sales speak even before I took her out to dinner. All the stuff you do in sales, I'm doing with her. I land the jump. I tell her how I feel. And she looks back at me and says, John, you are like a brother to me.
Oh,
Yep.
damn. And you got out
Dude,
of the friend zone. How'd you do that? That's
I'm
a
crying.
miracle
It's
in of
the end of it,
itself.
man. So like it backfired, man. Like I knew it was never going to happen, but in business you learn, go back to the phone, go back to the basics, keep doing the work, plan more, work harder, strive. So that's what I did with her. A year later, I asked her out again, and I'll shorten the story. But she said no again. She's like, John, nothing's changed. And what finally changed in her heart is when I changed mine first. I
Hmm.
stopped pursuing her for my own glorification. Because if I'm being super honest about it, why I probably most wanted her, and I think why many of us most want success, whether that's with a girl, whether it's with a house, whether it's with revenue, whether it's with employee headcount, whatever the thing is. Frequently, it's to validate us.
Mm,
Be honest about it.
mm,
It's to validate our own like brokenness. So I'm looking to be validated in the presence of a girlfriend. That's what I want. When I finally stopped pursuing that and I started just loving her, period. Nothing, man. I love expecting nothing in return. We changed.
mm,
And that still happens even now that we're married, but we changed. And I think it freed me to be more present and to have no expectations and to just be in the moment, which completely changes the interactions, by the way, when you're actually in the moment with a girl or with a future client. You know this from your own experience. When you're just loving the one in front of you, period, it changes how they interpret you. So what happened in our dating relationship, then I'll tie this back to business and then I'll be quiet. A year later, she takes me out to dinner and she said, John, I don't know what's changed, but
mm,
every time I'm with you now, I get butterflies in my stomach. I wish they would float away, but I've fallen for you. John, will you date me? We dated for 2 years. We've been married for 20. What led to all of that was when I finally stopped pursuing it for me. So now you're like, well, John, cute story. I'm glad you got the golden retriever in the family at the end of the story. And, there's a rainbow and a little pot of gold for you and Beth. Good for you guys. We have had as a speaker now 38 sales calls where people are doing a beauty contest to see who they want as their speaker at a conference. 38 times. As you're hearing on this podcast, I'm not the most well spoken. I dangle prepositions. My hair is in my eyes too often. I'm missing my fingers, man. I walk with a weird gait. Like there's a lot wrong with me. We are 38 for 38 in booking keynotes when they loop me into it. So you probably are like, well, dude, what's that about? How well do you land the jump? Here's what I do. Steal shamelessly now, kids. I never, ever, ever on those calls talk about myself. I don't talk about my keynote. I don't talk about my stories. I don't talk about my scars. I love them. And I ask them about their conference and I ask them about their hopes and I ask them about their dreams and I ask them about previous successes and failures. What happened? What are they looking for this year? When they walk out of that room, how will they know it was like, man, this was a conference that changed our organization?
mm.
In like 29 and a half minutes in, they haven't asked me anything, but they look around us in a group and they're like, well, what do you guys think about John? They know less about me now than they knew ahead of time. But they recognize this is the kind of person who can serve us and serve our needs. And so you said, John, how do you, connect these two things by not trying to, by being laser focused ultimately on what success is, having big, audacious goals, having the tactics that are going to move you forward, but then by delivering the work in a way where you just love the one in front of you. And when those two things collide, you can do things that no other business owner can do in their lives because it's not about business and it's not about revenue. It's not about sales targets. It's about love.
Wow. Yo, what you just said was profound. You're talking about keeping the goal in mind, but then not attaching it on the day-to-day basis to the individual you're talking with, because then they can feel there's some kind of ulterior motive. And like you can feel if somebody's only in it for them or if they're in it for the grand scheme of it, the love in the situation. And you're talking about not trying to force somebody to need to do this specific, or in this case, hire you for a speaking gig. You're talking about you've got the vision in mind, and you, instead of making it about that vision with the person you're talking with, you make it about them, what their vision is. And by not looking at it from what you need to accomplish, but what they need to accomplish. And it seems so simple, really. It's just straightforward,
Totally.
but in practice, it's a lot more difficult to detach from your own needs to, especially when you do need something, when you're dead broke and you're in a pickle,
Yes,
you're in a
man.
hole, man. And so, but you still have got to find a way to look at it to benefit them wholeheartedly, not as a tactic, but genuinely, knowing
It
that
is the hardest
that
thing
is going to get you to where you want to be.
when you're hungry to still give your bread first to the one in front of you. Like that,
Yeah.
that is the
Mm.
hardest thing in the world. It's very easy when the phones are ringing down the hall and life is relatively easy. It is extraordinarily difficult when life is very hard. What I will say though is when 2020 struck and COVID started spreading, you can imagine in our world, my world is motivational speaking, leadership speaking, the stage presence, man, one-to-one contact, physical events. We still we still serve the one in front of us. What are your needs? What are you trying to accomplish? What are your people going through? What does success look like? And even in the midst of a very difficult time in the careers of people who do what I did, we had our best year still to that point. And then 2021 was better. And 22 was better. 23 was best. 24 looks like it's going to be better than 23 because our success is tied ultimately to the success of the ones that we're serving. And we've cooked our trains together and we make sure that
Mm.
we are shoving coal into their engines, not ours first.
So hard to do, man. But yeah, walk me through it really, because what you just said is incredibly profound, and I want to really be able to grasp what you just said. You got the goal, but you focus on the individual. What does that actually look like in practice? Let's say that you're on a call with somebody who's thinking about hiring you for a speaking gig. How do you actually work that situation? What's your mindset like going into it?
So when you're dating someone, it's almost like if you're prospectively dating someone, if you're almost telling that person, like, have you thought about Bill, my neighbor, or Jimmy, my roommate? Like, it's almost like, holy cow, this guy is so free that it makes that person even more attractive in
Mm,
the dating world. Like when you are that free, like just like, hey, I just want to serve you. Seriously, it makes you majestically attractive. And so in the same, and I don't do that for that purpose, but in the same manner, if the focus is sincerely about them, and if you get them thinking about things that they know they should have been thinking about, what does success for this conference look like?
mm,
And they're like, dude, we probably should have thought about that before we hopped on this call. Why do you bring in keynote speakers? Why do you pay them the money that you do? Speakers are paid a lot of money to do what they do. What's that investment about? What do you want in the lives of your people? What's the biggest struggle they're dealing with right now? How could that be rectified in an hour? What are you going to do with them afterwards? When it's really boom, 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 hammering into what their life is, what their struggles are, what
mm,
success looks like coming out of it. People know when they're being sold. They know when they're being sold, and they know when they're being encouraged and loved and inspired. So we understand the dichotomy between the two. And I don't ever want to sell anybody anything. Even at the end of the call, one of the things I have to walk them through is, have you thought about purchasing books for your people? And John's an author. He's got a couple books out. And it's one of the things many of our conference attendees will do. They'll buy books for all their people. And that's awesome. But even that, it's never a sales approach. It's always a way to serve them. And it's one more thing that might benefit your people. And not only your people, but your people then go home to their people. They go home to partners and spouses and roommates and children and parents who are ill. And this little book can travel with them and be a gift to also the people that they love and that they work for. And there's a benefit to you in that regard as well. So our focus, maybe almost wrongly so, because we don't view ourselves as a sales organization, is to just love the one in front of us and to trust that it's going to work out well. For 20 years, it has.
to trust is good to trust at the end of the day. Yeah, to not need it to happen, to trust that it will happen when you do what needs to be done, when you do the service, the duty that goes into it.
And one more thing, just because I don't want people to think like, do you guys even wear shoes at work? Like, yeah, my shirt is tucked in currently and the shoes are on. We're very focused on goals and we are very focused on following up, and we're very focused on from the very first email or phone call until they get John on the call, until they book the event, until he travels in, is there in person, the follow-up, the letters that we send, handwritten notes afterwards, the gifts that we send them, the phone calls. We send them cards on their birthday and Christmas letters afterwards with John's family on it. And on the anniversary of our events, we reach out to them and say, hey, 1 year ago, 2 years, 6 years ago, can you believe it? We were in Naples together. Bill, hope you're doing. We treat them, in other words, like family. So this isn't just again more sales. But if you truly love the one in front of you, how would you treat them? How would you want to be treated? And if you come in at your entire sales cycle from that, if you truly wanted to be served from their lens, what would you want? What would you want that contact to look like? How frequently would you want to be followed up with? What would you want the tone to be? It will change how you treat them, the tone you use, the frequency with which you use it,
Mm,
the approach you use, the length that you will follow through. We have clients out of 20 years that I'm still sending them Christmas cards. When we're in town, we will still visit with them. And it's not to sell them. I think we've outgrown, in some regards, these clients. What they were paying 20 years ago is not what clients pay today, but we're not selling anyway. We're there to serve people. And in a marketplace that is so self-centered, that goes, the other side of it will go viral. When everyone, Fred Rogers' mom, I love Fred Rogers and his mom. Fred, when he was scared, used to tell his mom, I get scared. And she said, Fred, when you see the flames, stop looking at the flames and start looking at the people responding to them. Start looking for the firefighters. The world right now is focused on the fires.
mm.
And we want to remind people what it looks like to be focused on the firefighters and to become one.
To become
Because
one.
that is so uplifting in a marketplace that is depleting.
Hmm. To become one is the major pivot there from not only looking at the fires to seeing what the solution to the fires are and being the one that cared enough to deliver the solutions to the people who desperately freaking needed them, man. And we as entrepreneurs have the opportunity to be that firefighter, to be,
Right.
which is a powerful analogy in this case specifically, right? So, and you've done that. You've been the firefighter to your 9-year-old self by doing everything that you've done for these last 29, 30 years.
Mm,
You know what I mean? So there's
yeah.
really, in, there's a literal element to it. It's figurative, but there's a direct parallel with being your own firefighter. And I think there's also a lesson that we can learn there in terms of being our own healer to our traumatic events that happened to us in the past, and not looking at them as something that happened to us, but something that, and you can speak to this, something that happened for us and
Boy.
therefore for all of the other people, which it's so hard to say that at the beginning. But and like, it's, you couldn't have said at 12 years old, this happened for me. I mean,
Right.
but now looking back, that would you say that that happened for you and therefore for all the other people that you could therefore be a firefighter too?
Right. Yeah, well said. So it took a long time to say yes to that. In fact, one of the questions the Girl Scouts asked me 20 years ago is, if you could go back in time and blow out the flame, would you? And my
Wow.
answer to them was, of course, I blow it all day long, baby. You know, why would any fool want to go through this?
Hmm.
And
The answer is
now
different.
I was asked that same question when I spoke a couple of years ago to the St. Louis Cardinals, which is, I'm a St. Louis guy, and that was my team I had growing up. And then this dude who is introverted and lacks confidence and all the other things I went through as a kid and young man is in front of the St. Louis Cardinals, getting them ready for spring training, getting them ready for a season, being asked questions by them afterwards. And one of the questions was, would you do it again? And the answer at that point, this is now in 2017, is absolutely, man. I would go through it again.
Hmm.
Because what I recognized then is it led to formation of character and conviction of faith. It led to where I went to college, which led to the chance encounter with a brunette named Elizabeth Grace, who eventually, over a long sales cycle, became my wife, who gifted me 4 kids. The other thing crisis does, if you pay attention to it and don't run from it, it leads to healing. It leads to humility. It leads to toughness. It leads to compassion. It leads to grit. It leads to gratitude.
Hmm.
It leads to dreaming bigger about tomorrow than you did about yesterday. It's like so much of what an entrepreneur needs to truly be successful will only come from a place of brokenness. Like you need to be burned. And I don't mean
Hmm.
by a house fire, but you need to at some point go through the struggle of life to ultimately be equipped to weather the next storm, because it's coming, man. Every day is it's running a business is hard work. And yet going through the hard stuff in the past reminds you you can go through the hard stuff at the present.
And without those quote unquote negative experiences, you wouldn't have been equipped to have the hose to put that fire out for yourself and for others now. And you wouldn't have had the tenacity and, like you said, the grit to move forward when things seem darkest. And I feel like there's always a moment where we have to get past where we are, who we are, to become who we can be and to do what we
Right.
can do. And I think that's a beautiful thing and a beautiful place to leave it, man. So, incredible conversation, fascinating individual, dude. And I want to give you sincere appreciation for what you've done and what you do because it's powerful. So, thank you, brother. Seriously.
Well, dude, great interview, great questions, great conversation. So often I feel like these interviews are like a checklist.
Ah,
Like
yeah,
you read
right.
question number one and two and three and four, and once we get to
Uh-huh.
11, we're done. And I feel like this was two dudes having a beer at a bar or
Yeah,
a
right.
coffee at a coffee shop,
That's what I'm
talking
talking
life.
about, dude. Yeah,
And it was
absolutely.
cool. And by the way, if anybody is just looking to stay in touch, our website's johnolearyinspires.com. So it's johnolearyinspires.com. And on there, you'll find my email and my number and our social and our podcast and our books and our platform. But that first piece is the most important, man. Like I'm in. So if you all need anything, you drop us a note and the answer is yes.
I love it, man. Where should they start? Should they start by dropping you a note with a specific book they have in
Yes.
mind? Where's the first step?
No, man, don't buy a book. Tell me what's going on in your world. Like start the conversation. And so
Hmm.
all the information's there, emails there, and the numbers there. But if if I were if I were to begin the journey, I would start by emailing me and just saying hi and tell me what's going on in your world. And then I'd give you some feedback on where you should begin the journey because it's so individual.
Mm.
Like have a podcast too, and we've interviewed 750 people. So for some folks, it might be like, dude, how do I build this? And at that point, I might say, dude, I would listen to a podcast with Dave Ramsey or some of these great business minds, or I'm struggling with even dreaming big, and I would introduce them to an astronaut named Jim Lovell, who is the most crazy story of he's the Apollo 13 astronaut, and the humility with which he shares the story and the grit that he determined. And halfway through the interview, his wife comes into the call. She's like 90, he's 91, married 70 years. And halfway through, she says, what are you doing? You hear this, and then he says back, I'm on a podcast. And she says, oh my God, not the moon story again. Jim, like, the dude's been to the dark side of the moon twice. And the wife is beating him up because it's like it bores her. And I just think there's so much beauty even in that. So I would try to personalize the next step for the
Mm.
individual. And regardless of where they start, I would beg them to begin. Just
Mm.
start. Watch what you can do in your life. Change like erosion. We talked about this, and then I'll be quiet. Change at first is so slow and it doesn't seem like anything positive is happening. But if you can keep stepping and stepping and stepping and stepping, you will look back in a year and then in a decade, and you will be in a radically more positive place than you were today. So keep moving.
Wow. Amazing, man. John, dude, thank you for being here, brother. It's thank you for everything you do. Seriously, it's sincerely, it's a massive impact you're having. So thank you, brother.
I
And
appreciate it.
we will keep in touch, man. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Kyle, for everything, man. Keep going.
We will, baby. We will. We're not stopping now. Come on. We got some fires to put out, baby. All
Grab
right.
your hose, go to work, man. And
There we
thanks again.
go.
Keep doing the
That's
work.
what it's all about, dude. All right, John. We'll keep in touch, brother. Ciao.
Thanks, Kyle.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that podcast episode. And if you want to get a free copy of my book, go to kylesbook.com and you can get a copy there. I'll talk with you soon.